In this video, I want to explore Extinction Rebellion. I want to make a clear divide, if I can, between thinking that there are very important and urgent issues with the climate which must be addressed, and then automatically going from that to a support for Extinction Rebellion. I want to explore whether Extinction Rebellion are of any use in terms of reducing the impact of anthropogenic, in other words, man-made climate change, or whether in fact they're potentially even doing more harm than good. Now, if you're a climate change denier, climate skeptic, or whatever label you're given or choose for yourself, I hope you'll stay with me. A major theme of this video is exploring whether Extinction Rebellion may in fact have influenced your position. I'd like to see more people becoming aware of the reality of the anthropogenic climate change and working towards reducing human impact on the environment, but I don't think the Extinction Rebellion approach is appropriate. Unless we have engineering and manufacturing on board with this programme, it will simply not get anywhere, and that I think is probably one of the major concerns I've got with the effectiveness or otherwise of Extinction Rebellion. Let's give you an anecdote which I think is quite useful in terms of understanding where I'm coming from in this video, and it's about the Centre for Alternative Technology in Mid Wales. I used to love going there. It's a bit commercial now, not been for ages. But in the 70s, when it was still new, very freewheeling sort of place, you could wander around and you could talk to the people who were building all this alternative technology stuff. I found it really exciting to be there. Now, on one of these visits, I was in a conversation with somebody building a turbine, probably a wind turbine, that doesn't matter. But at one point in the discussion, I pointed out that he got a can of Castrol GTX sitting next to him, and he was going to use that for the, obviously, for lubricating the turbine. So I raised with him what I thought was a pretty obvious question. Well, what alternative lubricants were available? Now, the most important thing here is that he simply had not noticed that there was any sort of conflict, any paradox between him building this alternative technology turbine and relying on Castrol GTX, products of the petrochemical industry. I wasn't trying to catch him out at all, but it does raise an absolutely essential point in all these alternative ways of doing things. So we've got the desire to rebel and to dismantle, tear down these existing structures. We see this in Extinction Rebellion. But the efficient generation of power, whether to turn electricity or anything else from the turbine that I was looking at, requires a minimization of losses through friction. Now, potentially, if this chap had had his Castrol GTX taken off him and he was depending on something else, obvious one would be vegetable oil produced on a press in the centre, it's very plausible that the efficiency would drop to a level that it barely worked. So it's these sort of profound paradoxes I just don't see engaged in Extinction Rebellion. So just like the engineer not even noticing his dependence on a product of the international petrochemical industry and his alternative technology, I see Extinction Rebellion really missing some fairly major paradoxes in what they are doing. Now, continuing with sort of the personal to get a feel of where I'm coming from, I'm pretty passionate about repair. I love old machinery, the whole sort of reuse, upcycle. I love built to last. I've got a 1939 Velocette, which is just beautifully engineered, and it's, you know, it's an 80-year-old motorcycle, but you can still ride it. That's built to last. But how do I do my repair, upcycle, etc.? Well, because I've got a well-equipped workshop full of tools which have been produced in the modern industrial complex in which I live. I'm getting into pallet projects. They're great. Okay, so it's sort of free stuff. Pallet projects, right? Okay, well, the starting point is I need my car to go and collect them because they're fairly big and heavy, really. Now, whereas it's not essential for these projects, it makes them far more viable. If I've there and I've got my Makita cordless drill and I've got my Turbo Gold PZ double self countersunk wood screws, okay, well, that's not very alternative really, is it? But I'm very aware of the paradoxes at the heart of what I'm doing. So when I'm doing this, I'm being what? Well, I'm being an individual subversive. And when in the past I've done this with others, playing with sort of living in community, that sort of thing, what we've been doing is modelling different ways of living, more sustainable ways of living. We're not trying to crash the system. That's very important. But also we were very aware, and I'm very aware, that all these little sort of dips into living as a freegan, actually what we're doing is we're just being parasitic on the rest of the nation who are living in that sort of normal consumer culture, throwing stuff away that people like me can then, repair, reuse, upcycle, etc. Okay, and I also need to get on the table that I'm not a climate scientist. In fact, I'm not any sort of scientist in the way that I want to use the term. I've got A-levels in maths, physics and chemistry. I've got a few years of engineering and I've got a pretty decent understanding of philosophy of science. Now this gives me a reasonable level of scientific literacy, but in no way makes me a scientist. I'm not prepared to give anyone the label scientist unless they've got at least a degree in physical science. Real scientists, as far as I'm concerned, are those with doctoral level research under their belts in a physical science. You don't understand the science involved in climate change unless you are capable of looking at the equations used in the modelling and see where the variables are, understand how the values have been chosen for those variables and have the ability to assess the validity of those choices. Now, of course, the vast majority of Extinction Rebellion supporters never get anywhere even close to that level of scientific understanding. The climate scientists research, they distill down then their work into a journal article, the press then read the article, distill it down for the ordinary lay public, and the ordinary lay public, which is really, that's where Extinction Rebellion are in the main, they then read it. And here's the important thing, think that they understand the science that was right at the beginning of the process. Now I start with this because so much of the Extinction Rebellion programme claims to be about the science. And much of it appears to me to be unable to distinguish between ideological commitment to a particular direction and scientific hypotheses and data. Now, Extinction Rebellion claims to be about the science. Now, note the singular here and the presentation as if there is simply one science, capital T, capital S, and that's it. Greta Thunberg tells us that we must unite behind the science. Now, we saw the same thing with the follow the science mantra of Boris Johnson's team in presenting their response to COVID-19. Now, this strikes me as showing a profound lack of understanding of the scientific method and how science works and what science is. So, staying with the COVID-19, in the context of a virus which has been known about and studied for a little over 6 months, we're close to a situation where there are as many opinions on the various aspects of COVID-19 as there are teams of scientists working on it. It's possible even that there are as many opinions on COVID-19 as there are individual scientists working on it. Now, climate change has been studied for decades, but we are still a long, long way from consensus on anything beyond the very basic one that human activity looks as if it is impacting on climate change, and what we're experiencing at present is not simply part of the naturally occurring climate cycles. But even areas where there is what might be called settled science, which climate science is a long, long way from that. So even those areas where there's settled science, there's still disagreement. And there's even the possibility that the whole set of theories in that area will suddenly be overturned and replaced by a new paradigm. This has happened repeatedly over the centuries. There's no reason to believe that it will stop now, and that our settled science even is somehow solid and unchangeable. So I would suggest, therefore, that the whole Extinction Rebellion phenomena is not primarily about science at all. The science they have chosen to base their work on was chosen because it supported the ideological commitments they already had. Now, I may not be a scientist, climate or otherwise, and therefore unable to comment on the climate science data. But an area I do understand is religion, belief systems, ideology. Choose whichever of those very much overlapping terms you wish to apply. Now, watching the Extinction Rebellion protests in London, it was clear that much of what was going on was best understood in terms of religion. As I read the Extinction Rebellion website, I am in very familiar territory with the language and style. This is a religious presentation. I find this sort of presentation difficult when I meet it in my own tradition of Christianity. So as you read the Extinction Rebellion website, you're aware that what is on offer is absolutely marvellous. Its precise meaning hovers just out of reach, but you know it's there, and it draws you in at an emotional level and unites you with others who share that same vision for what they know not quite what, but it feels good, and they know it will be wonderful when it's shared more widely. Now, much of the language of Extinction Rebellion falls very clearly into the realms of the apocalyptic. Okay, let's have a look then at some of that apocalyptic language. This is continuing with this theme of saying that Extinction Rebellion is not so much about the science, but it's about religion. And here we've got a scientist. It's in the video on the website under the Truth tab, and this is Dr. Gail Bradbrook, who is a scientist, and she's presenting in the website the Extinction Rebellion bit that says about us. So this is a scientist, and what I'm really looking at here is, do you want to tell me where the science is in what she's saying? This civilization is finished. It's finished whether you like it or not. If we have 3 years of El Nino bad weather events, the food systems are fucked. We'll be fighting over cans of beans. We really are at a crossroads. What we choose to do today is the difference between life and death on Earth. We have to make something more beautiful and more connected and more local. Now, it doesn't take a genius to work out that there's nothing scientific in what she's just said there. You don't need a scientist to say that. That is a statement that falls far more in the realms of the religious, the ideological belief systems than it does in the realms of science. So it's not a system. That's not a statement based on science. It's based on based on an ideological disposition in a dystopic and revolutionary direction. Now, of course, this apocalyptic language feeds very nicely into the Extinction Rebellion political programme. If you paint a picture that is as dire, as dystopic as the one that Extinction Rebellion tend to present, then it's incredibly easy to justify pretty well any government action, no matter how draconian, because it's there to save the planet. Now, Extinction Rebellion make it pretty clear as you read the website that they reject the current political system. Now, as Extinction Rebellion are functioning in Western liberal democracies, then that's presumably what they are rejecting. So what do they propose as a way from where we are now, with what they consider to be a failed political system, to the system that they are proposing? They talk about citizens' assemblies. So what are they talking about? Are they really suggesting that there's a rebellion which brings down the established order so they can then rebuild their green utopia? Now, it's also just a sort of general observation here that as I look at the people involved in Extinction Rebellion, they strike me as just exactly the same people, the same categories of people, the same types of people, the same ideologies that you will find. You find them in Extinction Rebellion, you find them in Black Lives Matter, you find them there, trans campaigners. So they're exactly the same people, that's for the older cohort, or exactly the same ideological type for the younger ones, who in the past were finding some other movement as a weapon against the establishment and wanting to tear down the establishment. So, floats a question here, just how many of these Extinction Rebellion activists are in fact sort of rebels seeking a cause, any cause, doesn't matter. Let's just see what The Guardian is putting at the top of the list today. Now back to directly to climate then. As I understand it, there's a very strong agreement across a very wide range of climate scientists to take the view that human influence on climate has been the dominant cause of observed warming since the mid-20th century. I take that as just as established science. I'm very keen on getting people to accept this as a major component of future planning in many areas of life, whether that's just from personal choice of the clothes that we buy through to government decisions on power generation. But I'm equally keen to separate this from support of Extinction Rebellion and their programme. And a clear indication of my concern over Extinction Rebellion is the use of the word irreparable in this section of the website here. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it's not a smart move really to say that the planet has suffered irreparable damage. Now, normally when we have something with irreparable damage, we actually cease to care about any future damage because it's, it's finished really, isn't it? We don't then suddenly decide, oh dearie me, the car's just suffered irreparable damage, in other words, it's a write-off, dearie me, we better hadn't damaged it any further. It's not the way that it usually works. So the major theme then, as I keep returning to this, running through this video, is ensuring that we see the difference between the scientific data and the political decision for action, which will then follow from that data. Extinction Rebellion constantly conflate the two. Now, as we move down the same page, again, I don't actually have much problem with the analysis here. It looks fairly straightforward, really. What I do have a problem with is the standard combination, really, where you've got this religious combination of apocalyptic proclamation combined with utopian solutions. The Extinction Rebellion programme looks to me very close to wanting to bring the entire capitalist system crashing down. They want to eliminate the existing political structures, and from what they're writing, the indications are they expect this collapse of the existing order to usher in a world where we can then all live along the lines of their idealized image of simple tribal peoples living in harmony with nature. Now, as far as I can see, when you talk about science and data, well, there's no indication at all in the evidence from world history that it's going to play out like this. What always happens when the existing order is pulled down is that it issues in a world of failed states ruled by warlords. So looking at some fairly obvious modern examples of this, well, ISIS don't need an industrialized base with antibiotics, contraception, democratic structures. It's based on a 7th century religio-political ideology. It can function very happily in a world which has had all the benefits of the 20th century stripped from it. There's no shortage of explorations of the aftermath of collapse of political structures in the West, in film and book. There's loads of them. The Extinction Rebellion dream requires that liberal democratic structures with its rule of law and order, which then protects us from being eaten alive, well, possibly literally, by predatory groups, which are only held in place by that rule of law. It's probably not a smart move, therefore, to remove those structures. So yes, we face dangers from climate change. I'm certainly not disputing that. Climate change is disrupting fragile and complex interrelated ecosystems. Again, no problem with that at all. But I want to add into that the liberal democracy, which allows these international negotiations to take place, the United Nations, international conferences and treaties, some sense of world policing, that lot is also incredibly fragile. Disruption and rebellion could very easily wreck the very system that's going to be required to pull us back from the brink by putting in place laws, treaties, etc., which are enforced. It's very common for people in the West, and it strikes me as particularly the sort of university educated, to completely fail to engage with just how fragile is the liberal democracy we enjoy in the West. Now, just have a look at it. Giving women the vote started very small in the 19th century. It's a mere 100 years since women were given full vote in all of UK. 1918, that was. French women were granted full voting rights. That's 1944. The voting age, so the current system in UK that we work to, the voting age was reduced to 18. That's 1969. The model we're currently running, therefore, is barely 50 years old. Now, in the context of the history of the entire world, Western countries running this system for 50 years barely registers. 500 years from now, what the university educated tend to see as the most natural and perfect way of running a country, backed up by the UN on a world scale, well, that lot could be seen as no more than just a blip as the Western empires crumble and some other cultures move to dominance. Extinction Rebellion is very keen on this idea of telling the truth. But the truth is complex, the truth is nuanced. Telling the truth includes the fragile state of the liberal democratic project, the complexity of the discussions between scientists as they analyse and model data that they use to then make the predictions. Telling the truth, very importantly, includes the way that species Homo Sapiens actually functions on planet Earth. And as we move on to the next one, this is Act Now, and that just looks to me as a target which is unrealistic and utopian. Government must act now to halt biodiversity loss and reduce greenhouse gas emissions net zero by 2025. Well, I'm making this video halfway through 2020, 4.5 years to go. At the end of December 19, there were 38.7 million licensed vehicles in Great Britain. They're not going to go away or be replaced by electric anytime soon. Most of those vehicles have got a good for another 10 years of usable life. It's simply not going to happen in 10 years, well, without a revolution, without draconian government legislation. A similar vein, 23 million homes use gas for their heating. My house is one of those. Well, how many people of those are going to remove their current central heating, hot water system and replace with electric in the next 5 years? That's pretty expensive. I'm certainly not planning on doing that. There's nothing wrong with the current system in my house. And this isn't even touching rail, shipping, industrial emissions. So as I look at that net zero by 2025, I see a target that's either for delusional fantasists or dangerous fanatics planning a revolution to overthrow the existing structures and force people to do it. Maybe it's a combination of both, along with some other elements thrown in for good measure. And then alongside those very specific programmatic statements as to how Extinction Rebellion is going to work, you then end up with these just weird religious sort of passages. And so we've got another one here, you know, because they are the touchstone of nations, carrying the moral authority of innocence, because they've not lived long enough to have their clear vision dimmed. This is not a game. It is about life and death, and they know it. Because they are young enough to know cheating is wrong, and old enough to see they have been cheated of their safety, their dreams, and their future. Because they are young enough to be awed by the magic of living creatures and old enough to be heartbroken by their slaughter. Because they are young enough to know it's wrong to lie and old enough to use the right words. This is an emergency. Well, yeah, we've got one here, though, one of those wonderfully poetic and noble sounding passages, which I suggest is a combination of its empty phrases and dangerous delusion. I've got no idea what the phrase touchstone of the nations is supposed to mean, but I do understand carrying the moral authority of innocence. This is where I'm fully at home. I wonder if the writer of that has ever had any contact with children. I've produced two of my own. Now around 30. I've been a teacher and school chaplain for 25 years, working mainly with age 7 to 18 boys. Now, innocence is most certainly not a word I would use for any of them, either my own or the, well, it must be a couple of thousand schoolboys who I've known in my time in schools. Innocence? No. No, I wouldn't ever use that word of school children, and nor do I think I'd want to grant them much moral authority either. Schools work incredibly hard, usually alongside parents, to instil a sense of morality within the young. They're certainly not born with morals that we want them to have. If they were born with them, it wouldn't be so difficult to socialise them and then send them out into the big wide world at 18 as decent young men. But we work incredibly hard to get them to not lie, to not cheat, to not be unpleasant to their other schoolboys sharing the school with them. Children, innocent? No, I really, really don't think so. And then there are times when Extinction Rebellion becomes explicitly religious. And so you've got this term here. This is, you know, it is strictly non-violent as an active stance, ahimsa, preventing violence. Okay, that's a Sanskrit word taken from Eastern religious traditions. But we move on from that. It's a very important one next, because just note the use of the first person plural here. Now, any use of we or our is, as far as I'm concerned, it's an immediate flag for sloppy thinking. The first person plural must be defined for it to have any meaning. And so what's written here, it says, for our deepest longings are magnificent, to live a meaningful life, to be in unity with each other and with the life source. Call it the spirit, call it the divine, call it the still small voice. It doesn't matter what it is called or how it is spelt if it guides us in service to life. So pretty explicitly religious language there. But going back to this first person plural, does this refer to those who've signed up to the Extinction Rebellion programme? Well, in all probability, in that case, that's a true statement. If it's supposed to represent the Homo sapiens species, then it's demonstrably not only false, but it's a dangerous statement. If we move on into the future based on this idea that there are no predatory humans out there, then any programme of greening the world is just going to fail at the first challenge. And we finish then this section here. This vision has a map. It's a map of the human heart, believing in unflinching truth, reckless beauty, audacious love, knowing that life is worth more than money, and that there's nothing greater, nothing more important, nothing more sacred than protecting the spirit's deep within all life. This is life in rebellion for life. Now, again, my comment that I made about their understanding of children is being delusional. If that's their vision of the species Homo sapien, again, I really do wonder at which species they have been observing. As far as Extinction Rebellion is concerned, humans are by nature cooperative, and times of crisis can be times when life is lived transcendentally for a purpose beyond the self. Now, this takes us to a very important part of the analysis of the Extinction Rebellion programme, continuing with this idea of what species do they think they're dealing with. The statement is only partially correct of the species Homo sapien, and it's in completing the statement, which is the truth and is necessary for any progress with anything. Now, I like the author Jonathan Haidt, and he describes humans, the Homo sapiens species, as 90% chimp, 10% bee. And so what he's using there, chimps are pretty vicious creatures, competitive. They'll tear each other limb from limb if they choose to. The bee, collaborative and selfless. Now, even if these figures are even if Jonathan Haidt's figures there aren't accurate, and of course they're sort of guesses really, aren't they? But even if it's 50-50, even if it's 60-40, and we're 60% bee, we can't just work on the principle that we are this 100% bee, we're 100% collaboration and selflessness. We can't work on the principle that humans are by nature cooperative and live transcendentally for a purpose beyond the self. No, they don't. That's just not the species Homo sapien. And looking at the species then and through our evolutionary history, unless that competitive edge is included in the analysis of the species, then actually what you've got a desire for there is to go back to pre-sapien hominids. Now, the lot that came before sapiens, they were happy with the Herculean toolkit. They had the same tools for millions of years. They were just unchanged. It works, does the job, we're happy with this. Millions of years, exactly the same flint tools. Homo sapiens weren't happy with that, because that's who we are, that's the species we are. Not only were they not happy with that toolkit, if you look at what Homo sapiens have done, is they not only modified that toolkit, but you then had exponential growth in the toolkit, and it kept developing. Homo sapiens have been around on this planet for about 250,000 years, and in that time the species has gone from that Herculean toolkit, which was there when the Homo sapiens species came into being, and in 250,000 years it's gone from that to putting men on the moon, iPhones, safe childbirth, antibiotics, and life expectancy for many well into their 80s. Now, without engaging with the scientific truth, that's supposed to be the bedrock of the Extinction Rebellion programme, without engaging with the scientific truth of the species Homo sapien, the entire project is no more than a delusional fantasy. This links us back to this idea of children being innocent, and it takes us into a standard polarisation within political philosophy. You've got Hobbes, 17th century English, and you've got Rousseau, 18th century French. Hobbes saw humans as in a state of perpetual war against each other, and as far as he was concerned, you needed powerful government to hold us all in check and enable us to function safely. Rousseau saw us, he's the romantic. He saw us all as all innocents corrupted by society. Remove the social controls and our innocence and mutual love and care would flourish. Well, it's obvious that Extinction Rebellion are just completely sold on that Rousseau romantic vision. So continuing then with this section, Extinction Rebellion seeks an economy that maximises happiness and minimises harm, that restores soil health and the honourable harvest, taking only what is freely given from the wind, sun and tides. In a decarbonised and relocalised system, it embraces frugality for the sake of fairness. It seeks to restore a sacred rightness to the world, to everything its season, the beauty of its steady balance. It restores the right to dream, relentlessly, gracefully, wildly. As trenchant as it is effervescent, This rebellion beckons the conscience, quickens the pulse, and galvanizes the heart. Well, I recognise that as religious language. It's exactly the same as the sort of visionary language that's used at times in church. It's the sort of stuff I've used myself. It's great from the pulpit. It's great for, engaging emotionally with a congregation. The major problem is this Extinction Rebellion is supposed to be based on the science, and it's supposed to be giving us laying out a pretty fact-based programme based on the science, based on reasons as to why exactly we should be doing this, why should we be following it. And I go back to where the previous slide when I was saying, they've Extinction Rebellion have just completely bought into Rousseau's delusion of the fundamental innocence and cooperative niceness of the species Homo sapien. Their vision of indigenous peoples living in harmony with the land, with animals and with other people, it's just utterly delusional. It's got no basis at all in the history of hominids. Intergroup conflict, you can see that in chimps. That's going back a long way before hominids. It's just there. It's built into us at a genetic level. Unfortunately, it's a truth worth knowing about ourselves. It has been embedded within hominids ever since they've lived on the planet, and Homo sapiens are no exception to that. And so let's have a look at some of these Homo sapiens who are going to have to be brought on board for this to go anywhere at all. And this major problem I see with the whole Extinction Rebellion programme, the people involved with it, the way they present themselves, is that I just can't see it cutting any ice at all with the leaders of industry and commerce. And, if there was ever a group needs to be brought on board, if we're going to change anything in terms of human impact on climate, then it's them. If you're the part of the senior management running a major car plant in the Midlands, you need something a bit more tangible than that flowery, poetic, emotive, religious language on the Extinction Rebellion website. And some people dressed in red being dramatic at a demo in London. These big car plants, they employ thousands of people directly. They're inextricably linked into the economic structures of Britain and the world. These people are ones who've got to make the changes if we're going to change, and they need to be guided through the financial and technological changes that are required. And so moving to a sustainable future is far more complex than just simply ripping down the existing political and industrial structures of the current world. I for one, I rather like antibiotics. They're pretty good because they keep you alive. I liked it when my children were born, and I was pretty confident that my wife was going to go into labour, and we were going to come out the other side of that with a healthy baby and a living wife. That's just what happens. It's exceptional for there to be problems in childbirth in modern Britain. Why have we got that? Well, we've got that because Britain is a very highly technological society. That's why we have all this stuff which keeps us healthy and keeps us alive. Now, green future, now I'm pretty keen on this. We've got to work more towards a sustainable future. We need green policies, for want of a better term for them. But this green future requires us to work out how to keep all those benefits, like your wife not dying in childbirth, or if you're a woman listening to this, you not dying in childbirth. How do we keep those benefits without trashing the planet in the process? Now, in order to do that, we've got to get on board with the programme. We need to have there with us the people who run the industries. I'm really not convinced that Extinction Rebellion are the people to speak to the boardrooms of industry. So let's just dip very briefly into economics, and like I'm not a scientist, I'm not an economist either, so I can do no more than raise some fairly obvious questions. Now, I think there's almost certainly an important point in the Extinction Rebellion analysis that we can't really have an economy based on growth year after year after year when so much of our planet is pretty finite. That's not a new question. Extinction Rebellion didn't invent that. I remember exploring this with others endlessly. We used to chew the fat on this one in the 1980s, so it's been around for a long time. So the major question then, as we look at this, is how we get from where we are now, and now is pretty good, it's pretty comfortable, we've got lots of food, we eat well, we're kept warm, we've got medicines, it's pretty good really. So how do we get from where we are now to a sustainable economic model of the future without crashing the current system? And this is the problem I keep returning to with Extinction Rebellion. They strike me as having a very substantial dose of Marxist revolutionary politics mixed in with their ecological concerns, and would very happily crash the current economical system. We therefore need some serious engagement with economic models with a primary focus on sustainability. All that circular economy thinking would come in here, so an economy not based simply on growth and a linear model of production. And that's far from easy. Trying to decelerate growth, I know enough about economics to know that that could crash the system. It's certainly not easy, and we can't have simplistic approaches. And returning to the paradoxes I raised earlier with the Centre for Alternative Technology engineer just simply taking for granted the existence of Castrol GTX he was using as a lubricant. And the important there is without even seeing it. Now, Extinction Rebellion are almost completely dependent on modern IT infrastructure in promoting their work. Its website, its Facebook and other social media, they all have smartphones. The climate scientists only have the data to do their work and are able to generate the models they work from because of the very sophisticated instrumentation and computers which require a very highly developed industrial base to produce that lot. And if I may be permitted a possibly rather low hit, I wonder what the chemical composition is of the hair dye used by the woman presenting the Extinction Rebellion message in the videos on the website. Maybe showing correct social justice warrior colours is more important than worrying about dependence on the chemical industry. Now, my starting point for this video is that we are in a very serious situation with the human impact on climate. There have been some very productive discussions and some very important world-changing decisions have been made and continue to be made. Now, one I remember that it impacted on me very much was growing up in Manchester, and there was a Clean Air Act in 1956 moving the city to smokeless fuels. Now, it took quite a long time to actually get implemented. As a boy, I remember one of my jobs, you had to go out into the coal shed and bring in the coal. And this was standard coal. This was the black shiny stuff. And that's what we all used to burn to heat our houses. Thousands and thousands of those terraced houses, all belching out at times sulphurous smoke from the chimneys. The air quality was dire. The smogs, those smogs where you literally couldn't see your hand in front of your face in those, and people used to just drop dead if they had any sort of chest problems at all. That went. The air cleaned up. The buildings were all black and they were all cleaned, and they're still clean today. You go and look at them. They're not black anymore. Even the pigeons and the starlings and the sparrows, they're all the same colour. They were all black. So I saw that change from growing up as a boy with a black smog-filled Manchester to a clean air Manchester, or vastly cleaner air. Another one which I remember was the shift to unleaded fuels in the late 80s. So, Greta Thunberg is just simply in error when she just have a habit of ranting sometimes, but I've heard her with these rants about nothing has been done. Well, you know what? That's just not true at all. There's been huge progress. And so what we need to do is acknowledge that, be thankful for the progress that has been made. Go along with those who can see the progress, that those who've made those changes in the industry. Build on what has gone before. Speeding up the process is, maybe a good thing. But any approach has got to engage with reality. we really must tell the truth.